President Trump strongly denies a report that claims he insulted American Marines killed in action. How the latest controversy could impact the 2020 presidential election. Hello, I'm Mike Walter, filling in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. A stunning report by The Atlantic magazine lays out how President Trump reportedly disparaged dead U.S. military service members during a trip to France in 2018. Trump is accused of calling Americans killed or injured in World War I as, quote, losers and suckers. President Trump and the White House are pushing back against the report, while Democratic rival Joe Biden says if the report is true, Donald Trump is not fit to be the commander-in-chief. We have a lot to cover, so let's get straight to our panel. Joining us from New York is Amy Holmes. She's a political columnist for the Swiss weekly Die Weltwoche and a writer for HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. Also with us from New York is John Burnett. He's a political commentator and managing director and founder of One Empire Group. From Washington, D.C. via Skype, Amisha Cross is a Democratic strategist, and Steve Shigaris is a political journalist and analyst based right here in Washington, D.C. So this Atlantic magazine, very explosive, says that Trump referred to those who lost their lives or were hurt during fighting in wars as losers or suckers. The president vehemently denying it. Let's listen to what he had to say.
And to think that I would make statements negative to our military and our fallen heroes when nobody's done what I've done with the budgets, with the military budgets, with getting pay raises for our military. It is a disgraceful situation.
John, what do you make of the article and his response?
Well, when you look at all the lies that the opposition have said over the years, you know, I'm really not surprised by this article. A highly respected reporter, John Roberts, who was there at the time, did not hear anything that was stated in the article. And he went a step further recently, called reporters that lean right and some reporters that lean left, and he said all of them did not hear anything to that effect at that time, which leads me to believe that this is nothing else but a campaign tactic from the left to try to disparage the president within 2 months of the election. That's the only way I can describe it, and that's from a credible source in the media.
So, Amy, let me ask you about this, because part of this is about his relationship with John McCain in this article. And we do know, going back to 2015, he did have some rather critical remarks of McCain when he was asked about him. He's seen as a war hero here in the United States for his 5.5 years he spent as a POW. Let's listen to what Trump said at that time.
He's not a war hero.
He's a war hero.
He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you.
Now, Trump says he respected McCain, but he didn't agree with his politics. Where do you see this landing, Amy? I want to get your thoughts on this.
Well, I don't think this is so much about John McCain as it is an effort to swift boat President Trump coming from the left. Now, when Trump says, I wouldn't say something like that, I don't think that's necessarily the most solid ground that he could be standing on. But as to John's point, this story is already being undercut by new reports that John Bolton, who, as we know, is a very harsh critic of the president, he said he was there, he didn't hear any such thing. Also, the people who are making this accusation aren't willing to go on the record. BuzzFeed, a reporter from BuzzFeed, he dug up emails at the time. He had done a FOIA request and saw the email from the chief of staff, John Kelly, saying this event, or at least the helicopter ride, has been canceled because of weather. And in point of fact, the president did go to a military cemetery the very next day. The way that this story gets legs is if there are people who are willing to go on the record, put their names behind it, and those are people that Americans trust. But otherwise, I see this thing being over by the weekend, possibly being used in Biden campaign ads, but it's really just attacks on the president that so far I don't think have been reported out substantially.
And Steve, it's worth noting that Vote Vets has already got an ad up about this, and also the Associated Press, Washington Post, and Fox News coming out and saying that they've verified the story. Does this story have legs? How's it going to impact this election? We're just 2 months out.
Well, let's just remember, this isn't the first time the president has been accused of or has publicly said something negative about people in the military. We went through this in 2016, as you mentioned, in 2015. You played the McCain bite. He did this with Gold Star families. And it was an issue briefly throughout the campaign in 2016. But this really all is, I think, plays to Trump's temperament. And people were asked that question, voters were asked that question. If you look at the exit polling from 2016, and across the board, people didn't think that President Trump or Donald Trump, the candidate at the time, had the temperament to be president, yet people still voted for him. So the question moving forward is this kind of behavior baked in to Donald Trump's biography? And does it matter to voters moving forward? Has there been a sea change in how people decide to vote? Is temperament going to be an issue for people when they go to the ballot box in November? We don't know the answer to that question yet. And I think it'll be interesting to see if any polling indicates that in the coming weeks.
Amisha, I want to get your thoughts on what the vice president had to say today. He had a news conference. Of course, his son, Beau, was in the military. He was a JAG officer in the Army, and he was pretty upset about this, saying that this really casts some doubts about his moral leadership. Talk to us about how he's going to frame this issue, do you think, moving forward?
Well, to Joe Biden's credit, not only does this instance and this issue also cast moral doubt on Donald Trump, the many things that he said, disparaging remarks about various people have, including his actions while in office. But I think that for Joe Biden to lean in on this as someone who was a military father, who always brings up his son's military service, who respects the military, who has never had a bad word to say about them, I think that this for him is going to be framed in the narrative of Donald Trump is a president who does not respect the military. He's a president who is running on patriotism, who likes to stand behind and wave and hug the American flag, but, thwarted his own service by claiming bone spurs and whatever else he could do to not have to serve himself. This is a president who has, taken money away from what we would think of as veterans' health services. We've watched him fall back on his promises for mental health supports for veterans and veterans' homelessness. I think that what we're going to see from Joe Biden is him really lean in on what Donald Trump says about veterans versus the reality of how Donald Trump treats veterans. And honestly, I think that that's a very smart move, because this president has been known not only with his statements against John McCain and POWs, but he's been known throughout this administration to make promises to veterans that, quite frankly, have never come to fruition. We're seeing this week, just as of yesterday, this president is pulling back support for and funding for Stars and Stripes, which is a very prominent magazine, newspaper among the veteran and current servicemen population, because he feels as though that publication isn't necessarily glowing in terms of its conversation and the stories about him and his presidency. And I think that, there are going to be several people who take issue with this new report and this revelation about what was stated by President Trump.
And John, this kind of overshadowed some numbers that came out today. 1.4 million jobs added in August, unemployment dropping down to about 8.4%. Talk to us about the significance of the job numbers coming out on this same day.
Well, first, let me address the person that just spoke. When you look at it, when you survey veterans, the VA hospital has been overhauled. They actually have faith in the VA hospital. That's just one aspect that President Trump has taken that previous presidents have not been able to get done. And no president has undermined the military more than President Barack Obama and Vice President Biden by sending pallets of cash in the middle of the night to people that actually have said and saying death to America. So that's ultimately ridiculous. Now, switching to the positive note in terms of the job numbers, when you look at the last several months, we have actually been declining at a faster rate than even the economists have predicted. They said that we would, at this point in time, we would be at 10% unemployment. We are now in single digits at 8.4%. And if states open up, like New York, who still restricts indoor dining, no gym activity and so forth, and no shopping at malls. If states actually open up, we could actually see potentially between 5 and 6% unemployment by the election. And before year end, we might be hovering around that high 4, possibly low 5%. And then before inauguration, we might actually be back at between 3.5 and 4%. So this is a matter of opening up America. You know, we've seen a drastic decline in the number of cases, drastic decline in the number of deaths. We need to get back to work. And by that time, we should also have a vaccination.
John, I think you made your point. Amisha, we don't only have a half hour here. Amisha, I see you nodding your head in disagreement. I'll give you a short time to respond, and then I want to move on.
Well, I disagree specifically on the economy because what we know is that, you know, human behavior hasn't changed. We still don't have a vaccine for COVID-19. COVID-19 cases are rising rapidly in rural areas as well as some urban areas across the country. And there are specific demographics that are, you know, that have these cases at higher rates than others. What we do know is that even in areas where restaurants are open, where other venues are open indoors, you are not seeing the same amount of people come in as we saw pre-COVID. A lot of that is human behavior. People do not feel safe. I live in an area where these venues are open. However, they're at less than 25% capacity every single day. And it's not because, you know, they are not available for people to walk into. It is because Americans just do not feel safe right now. They don't feel like they have a president who's in control of COVID-19, and they're not willing to risk their lives to actually just go in and grab a sandwich.
Amy, let me ask you about leisure and hospitality. Amy, if I could just, leisure, hospitality, travel, these areas are really kind of still getting hammered. In fact, United saying they're going to furlough somewhere in the neighborhood of 16,000 employees. Is there anything that Congress and the White House can agree on to help some of these areas that are still suffering as a result of the coronavirus?
Well, they can agree on a bailout package, you know, as an assistance package for these small businesses. But it certainly doesn't help when you have the big story this week of Nancy Pelosi going to a hair salon when hair salons are supposed to be closed for everyone in San Francisco. It's illegal to go into a hair salon, and she wasn't wearing a mask. She was videotaped, and then sort of inexplicably, she commented on it and accused the salon owner, which only just kept the story going for another day. This story got a lot of play, a lot of traction. It was #1 trending on Facebook because a lot of Americans looked at this and said, wait a minute, so you're scolding us and telling us that we might even be homicidal if we go into a hair salon and don't wear a mask. And meanwhile, you're, you know, using special privileges to do just that. There was the mayor of Philadelphia who was just caught dining inside a restaurant. His excuse was, well, it was outside of Philadelphia and it was my friend who owned the restaurant. It was his business. Well, that doesn't really make sense. So you think it's better to spread COVID outside of Philadelphia to family and friends? Again, this really resonated with voters because they see one set of rules for the political class and another set of rules for themselves. But one last point on the economics, going to what John was saying. An economics advisor to the Obama White House, he actually warned Democrats early this summer. It was a big piece in Politico where he said, you got to watch out because we might see a V-shaped recovery come election time. So when voters are asked, is your life getting better? The answer will be yes. So be prepared for that when you're campaigning against Donald Trump, that the lockdown and the economic effects, they might not just be all downhill until November. There might be a V, and you have to be able to deal with that with a winning campaign message.
Steve, let's talk a little bit about the economy because the vice president had something to say about it as well today. Let's listen to him, and then I want to get your reaction on the backside.
The economic pain remains unrelenting for millions of working people of every race and background who aren't getting relief they need. Meanwhile, both are doing just fine, some better than ever. This divergence in fortunes is unique to any recession in recent memory. And the painful truth is, we just have a president who just doesn't see it. He doesn't feel it. He doesn't understand. He just doesn't care.
So, Steve, he's going to keep pounding on this. Is it going to be effective for him?
Well, we'll see. You know, the interesting thing about what's happening now as compared to what happened in 2016 is the president is the incumbent and he's running on his record. And yes, there's a pandemic that affected the economy extremely negatively. However, are people going to blame Donald Trump for what has happened with the economy? And then moving forward, are they going to have faith in him to fix what has happened to the economy moving forward? What we're seeing in polling is that generally, Americans are split on this. They do give Trump a little bit of a little bit more on that question of handling the economy, but overall on handling of other issues, especially the crisis of the coronavirus, not going so well for the president. And so the question I think we're going to be asking voters over the next month, 2 months, is do they think that Joe Biden is the answer to this question? Do they think that all of these other stories, you mentioned the Nancy Pelosi story, is that going to have any kind of effect on how voters, persuadable voters or voters on the fence, look at what the Democrats are promising and suggest that perhaps they would rather go back with Donald Trump for another 4 years? We don't know the answer to that question yet. Right now, Trump's playing from behind, and as the incumbent, having to defend what he has done over the last 4 years, it's not a great place to be 60 days out. But if things change, maybe his fortunes change as well.
Steve, are there persuadable voters? Because it seems like a lot of this is baked in. I mean, as you mentioned, 4 years ago, he was an unknown. A lot of people were kind of tired of Washington as we know it. For some, it was a Hail Mary. This time around, though, as you said, he's running on a record, and it doesn't seem like there's that many people out there that are kind of on the fence, are there?
It's looking like that's the case, and there are a couple of things that we see, especially in the national polls, but in other polls. Two things. One, people aren't saying that they're going to support third-party candidates. The last time around, especially this time of year, it was maybe 6-7% said they were going to choose a third-party candidate, which wasn't that high at the end of the day. They wound up going the other way, either Clinton or Trump. But we're not seeing that this time around. And what we're also seeing in a lot of the polling is that Trump's sort of high watermark in a lot of these polls is about 45 or 46%, where Biden is getting close to 50, if not over 50% in a lot of these polls, which leads you to conclude that most people at this point are not undecided. And so Trump has a lot more work to do over the next 60 days to try to change people's minds from supporting Joe Biden back to supporting him, because there are not a lot of people that are sitting there saying, I'm not sure if it's Biden or Trump at this point.
Amisha, there's a startling report out today.
There's a surprisingly high number of people who are still on the fence between Biden and Trump.
How
and it doesn't
surprised?
have to be
I mean, what type of numbers are you talking about?
I mean, last week I saw a poll that was 13% were undecided. That might have been an outlier, but it doesn't have to be a lot, is the point. That it only has to be a percentage or maybe even half a percentage to make the difference. Remember, Donald Trump lost the popular vote in 2016, and even his own team says that they won that election on 80,000 votes. That's it. With Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania in these key places. So you have enough undecideds to pull over to your side.
Go ahead.
But even
Mike,
when you factor
I think
in
it's
the numbers
also
that
worth
he
pointing
just
out.
outlined, he said 46 Trump, 50% Biden. When you factor in the 3.5% margin of error, that's only a half a point difference.
Well, 3.5 goes either way.
But when you factor, hold on, everyone. Listen to me first.
No, actually, I'm the host of the show. Yeah, I think
when you factor in that Hillary Clinton was far ahead at this point during her election than Joe Biden, and Donald Trump still won the Electoral College, that is not much confidence. And as Amy pointed out, there's upwards to about 13% of the people that are undecided.
All right,
so let's not discount the president.
That's not actually true. If you look at the average of the national polls, Biden has actually had a steadier, larger lead through this campaign so far.
The polls are tightening. That's the reason why Biden has actually changed his story and talking about law and order. He's walked back face mask. He's walked back a lot of things within the last week. So let's actually talk facts.
It's easy to try to compare it's easy to try to compare Biden and Clinton, but the political environment is completely different between 2016 and 2020. You're dealing with a president who is the incumbent now. He's not an outsider.
Now has a
record to defend. He has a record to defend. And so, as we've seen with incumbents that were embattled in the past, whether it's George H.W. Bush or Jimmy Carter in 1980, it's a hard hill to climb, and he's got a lot of work to do over the next 60 days if he wants to close that gap. I'm not saying he can't do it, but it's not like in 2016 when he was the outsider and he could rail on all the people in Washington and be the change agent and get people to at the last minute say, well,
I'll see you back on this show the week of the election, and we'll talk about it.
John, let's let Amisha jump in here for a second.
I'm just saying, I thought that there was a question, and this is just frustrating. What we're seeing is a lot of conservatives who continue to compare this to 2016. There's so many variables that are different. First and foremost, we have a President Trump who now has a record to run on, one that many people have found quite questionable and quite devastating in several ways pre-COVID-19. And I think that you also have to look at the fact that President Trump is looked at very starkly different because of his comments and because of his reactions to the protest. Just as of this morning, there was an ABC Ipsos poll release that said that over 56% of Americans think that Donald Trump handled the protest in the wrong way. He definitely has been off-putting to minority voters, which are a large share of voters, not only come this election, but going forward throughout America's electoral cycle. We're going to see more people of color voting at the polls. And this is a president, again, who Hillary Clinton is not on the ballot in 2020. He is running against Joe Biden. He is running against Kamala Harris. He has to make sure that he is actually, campaigning in a way that makes sense, and that is to expand his base. What Donald Trump has done his entire 4 years, and what we've seen him do during the Republican National Convention, so on and so forth, has been to talk directly to his base. He is not interested in expanding that base, and I think that is going to hurt him. Even in the battleground states that he won in 2016, that he was able to flip, those are states that are right now up for grabs, and states that are very highly looking towards change and looking towards a Joe Biden administration. So I think that we are, you're fooling yourselves if you think that just because we saw certain numbers in 2016, that's going to be replicated in 2020. Because the facts on the ground are that this 4 years later, we are not where we were in 2016. And a lot of the promises that Donald Trump made on that campaign trail have not come to fruition for many people across this country.
And one of those states that flipped was Wisconsin.
Within the last week,
let me, John, if you will, John, we want to get to some other, we want to cover some other territory. John, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. We've got to move on. We've got to move on, John. 29-year-old Jacob Blake was shot in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Both candidates went to Wisconsin this week. Let's listen to what they had to say.
Well, I think we've reached an inflection point in American history. I honest to God believe we have an enormous opportunity. Now that the screen, the curtain's been pulled back on just what's going on in the country.
To stop the political violence, we must also confront the radical ideology that includes this violence. Reckless far-left politicians continue to push the destructive message that our nation and our law enforcement are oppressive or racist. They'll throw out any word that comes to them.
Steve, both of these candidates framing this visit differently. Talk to us about that.
Well, Donald Trump and the Republicans saw an opportunity when violence erupted in Kenosha. Kenosha is a place that is a swing area. The Kenosha County in Wisconsin, Trump won that area by 238 votes in 2016. And so both sides saw that area as a place that could be where opinions of each of the candidates could be shaped by what's happening on the ground locally. And so the Republicans and Trump tried to make a big issue out of it. They hammered Biden, who was very quiet on the situation for a while until he spoke out about it in the middle of this week, and basically said, look, if you elect Joe Biden, this is the kind of thing you're going to see in your cities and towns. You're going to see buildings burned out. You're going to see riots everywhere. And Biden said, look, are you kidding? No, this is not what it's going to be. And not only that, he was blaming Trump, saying the reason why people are so upset is because of this president. Now, we're only seeing initial reaction to both of those strategies on this issue. And what it comes down to is that Americans, at least initially, are going with Joe Biden on this. And they're saying that they don't believe Donald Trump. They don't believe that Biden can't handle this and that they're in fear of their lives because of violence in cities. And so we'll see if that holds over the coming weeks. But it seems like the Republicans' calculation on this, at least short term, has not worked out the way they wanted it to work out. They saw an opening, and public opinion is not backing them up yet on that.
And Amisha, Biden's visit with the Blake family, also talking to Jacob Blake on the phone, what did that do for his campaign, do you think?
I think it spoke to what the campaign has been speaking about for months now, Joe Biden's empathy, the fact that he can relate to those who have lost people tragically or those who have gone through tragic situations. I think that it speaks to the fact that he cares about racial reconciliation and is going to move towards actually holding police officers accountable. I think that for Joe Biden, it is putting the action behind his words. This was a time for him to really showcase that he does care, that the campaign cares, but also to get some of the intuitive knowledge from the family as to what they want to see moving forward. Jacob Blake's family is not one that is vitriolic. It is not one that is hateful. It is one that is out to seek justice, and one that wants to make sure that what happened to Jacob doesn't happen to other African-American males and females across this country. They have been very reconciliatory. They have been very strong in the face of extreme adversity. And I think that having that conversation with him, it showcased, one, that they feel like they can trust him, because as you might recall, when it came to President Trump wanting to meet with them, they actually wanted a lawyer present. And they wanted a lawyer present because they know that President Trump lies. And President Trump says things that, on behalf of families that were never actually stated. So they definitely want to be represented in the light that they're actually coming forward with. So I think that for Joe Biden, this is just another very smart and very strategic move, but also one that showcases the heart that he has for these families and the heart that he has for the African-American community that is suffering right now and begging to have someone to understand and to take the lead.
Amy, as you know, ballots going out to folks in North Carolina today. The president had some things to say about voting, suggesting people might vote twice. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Send in your ballots, send them in strong, whether it's solicited or unsolicited. The absentees are fine. We have to work to get them. It means something. And you send them in, but you go to vote. And if they haven't counted it, you can vote. So that's the way I view it.
So what do you make of this? Because that got a lot of controversy.
Yes, very controversial. As we know, it's illegal to vote twice, so I would not be giving that advice out to voters. But getting back to the law and order topic, I think Kenosha is such an interesting example, and that both candidates, that they did need to go and survey the damage and talk to the residents, on all sides of this issue. It's interesting that Donald Trump, the governor of Wisconsin, said, "Oh, if you come here, you're just going to be stirring up, more violence and more trouble." And in fact, he stirred up a huge crowd of supporters who were there to greet him on the tarmac and were really, really pleased to see him there. But I do want to also put out this news report that I think that we need to keep our eye on, and that's that the sort of Canadian nonprofit activist organization called Adbusters, that they've put out a clarion call to their activist base to occupy Washington, D.C. in front of the White House between now and Election Day. And if that effort looks like anything that happened here in New York with Occupy Wall Street, that's going to be hugely divisive, not good news for Democrats, and could certainly persuade some of those persuadables that, Democrats in charge lead to this. I would tell occupiers, this plan, if you want Biden to be president, is a loser. Don't go for it. If you want to go camping, go into the woods. Don't be doing it in front of the White House.
All right, and wear your mask as well. Thank you all for joining us. Certainly appreciate it. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.
Hello everybody, I'm Anand Naidu. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, you may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists and others. It's a fresh, focused and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict or US politics, the Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find the Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search the Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.